I have with us Ahmed Abutalev, Mayor of Rotterdam. You have listened to them in the previous session, but thank you for joining us. We have Esther Alder, Mayor of Geneva. Thank you. And Javier Gonzalez, Mayor of Santa Fe. I'm sorry, I pronounce it in a very Mexican way. So welcome to this session. And as I said, we have Mario Pezzini. We have also Joe and Sylvain, who are going to be producing the comments after Joe Parilla, who is a fellow Brookings Institute, and Sylvain Guiller, who is the head of the LEAD program, the Local and Employment and Economic Development at the OECD. Let me just say some comments, because this is a very important topic for individuals, for cities, for countries. Skills, education, the future of work is really what takes our dreams away. I mean, it's really something that can allow people to thrive or not, allow companies to thrive or not, but it's not the majors who have the only responsibility. This is a shared responsibility usually, and you have here in the table majors who have very different way of organizing the delivery of the education services and the delivery of the labor services. So in this context, you have a framework that is so different in which you need to find your way in terms of helping. So you are not responsible for everything, but you need to find a way of helping people to thrive. And also you are the ones who are facing the music if it doesn't work. That's a very important element. And actually you are the ones that are really looking at how to deliver inclusiveness for skills, inclusiveness for high quality jobs. And I have to share with you an anecdote. When I arrived to Paris 10 years ago, I used to live in Mexico. I arrived in Paris and I have two girls, and I had nothing about good education in France, believe it or not. So I asked some colleagues, where do I put my girls? Which school is good? And they told me, I don't know, choose your neighborhood, which is awful, but it's true. Because it depends on the zip code, the famous zip code that President Obama has been praising, and then you have these groups localized in marginalized areas who receive bad education, who don't grow up the skills, and then who don't have access to a quality job. So I think this link between the education system, the skills, the jobs, and the neighborhoods is something we need to break, and I will be very, very interested in listening how are you doing that. And just to complicate the context, and then I give the floor to Brian, who's going to be moderating the majors. I'm happy that you're doing that. We are also confronting the advancement of the digital world. We are also confronting the fact that we should not just form skills, cognitive skills as we know them. We also need to have social-emotional skills. We have to have global competences to allow for our people to be more open to the world, more tolerant, more ready to work with different cultures, and that's really lacking. So just to complicate in terms of where do we want to go from here. So Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriela, and congratulations to the OECD for working on this issue. Let me, to get us started, let me say a word about United Way so you get a sense of my mind space in this conversation. We're a worldwide network of local organizations, 1,800 human development organizations. We raise just under $4 billion in the US, community by community, and about $1 billion more outside the US, and we partner with mayors and corporate leaders and local NGOs, and so we got to be big because we're small. And so we've been working on these issues for a long time, and as Mayor and I were just discussing, it used to be that we could work on gaps. You know, the government would do this, the marketplace would do that, and we NGOs would find the gap. People who didn't get it. Well, the gap's getting much bigger now. And so now it's a question of discussing the new social contract, I think in many ways is what this conversation is about. And I'll say, since I, for better or worse, now get asked this as an American quite often after the election. Let me make this point, this couple of points as it relates to this conversation, then we'll get into the conversation. How is it that the presidential election could end in the result it ended in the United States? Over 20 or 30 years, we've systematically in the US carved out the economic middle class. Globalization, where the marketplace was going fast and government and civil society couldn't keep up, so jobs were different. And so manufacturing jobs, steel industry jobs and so forth went away. So the middle class got smaller and smaller. We've systematically, over the last 10 or 15 years, I think, decimated the pragmatic political middle in the United States, mostly through gerrymandering of congressional districts. So Republicans only have to talk to Republicans, Democrats only have to talk to Democrats, our media feeds it. And then now we have allowed, I think, the beginning of the carving out of the cultural core of the United States by labeling people by identity. And all of this, so it's not one thing, and everybody wants to look at one election or one thing. And it's a growing income gap, it's growing inequality, it's the halting of social and economic mobility in the United States, and it's the fact, last thing I'll say is the culture is changing, the national identity is changing, and some people like that and some people don't like that. And so for the first time in the US history, in my estimation, we have 80 million baby boomers who look like me and 80 million millennials who look not like me, more multiracial, more multicultural, more progressive, more urban, and they're, for populations now, are adjacent to each other for the first time. Because the millennials now are old enough to be employed, they're in their early to mid-30s, they have a point of view, they're voting, and the boomers are on our way out, and they have a different view of America. And that's, I think, the short explanation. But the conversation here is about these gaps and how in cities do we start pulling those gaps together. So we'll ask each mayor to spend a couple of minutes on something innovative that you'd like to talk about as it relates to jobs in the workforce. We'll go to our discussants and then we'll come back to you. And so let me start with Mayor Aboutalab. I've heard you a couple of times now, and you're very focused on people, and especially marginalized people, homeless people in Rotterdam. And I wonder how you think about workforce development up here and people in greatest need here, and how that comes together in policy and direction and leadership for you.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor again today. I consider that as a high-level, high-technological innovation leading to low-tech labor. And in my vision, that is possible. Knowing that the labor market of tomorrow, within 5 years, believe me or not, will change completely. We own a port, the largest in Europe. So when I visit countries with ports, what I do is visit a port, which I did the first week of July in Singapore. Singapore is one of the largest ports in the world, even nowadays larger than ours. It used to be smaller. And if you walk down the port or you drive through the port, you see hundreds of cranes in the so-called salute position, doing nothing. There is no cargo. And Singapore produces nothing. Singapore is a place for logistics, to assemble containers from vessels with 20,000 containers to vessels with less than 10,000 containers, and then send them through the world, or vice versa. What does that mean? Within 5–10 years, the place where we produce products and where we consume products will change dramatically as a result of the so-called 3D printing. Nowadays, we succeed in printing plastics, And in my city, we started printing metals. Can you imagine? We put powder, metal powder in a machine under high pressure and temperature. It's pressed exactly, melted and pressed in the form that is dictated by the computer. Even very big machines can be printed that way. Can you imagine? You go home, design your own bicycle, send it through the computer to the next buy fabric where they made bicycles. You get a confirmation back, and the computer starts doing some math and tells you, well, the form you drew was maybe not a good one. Do you think something like this? You accept. Then you get a bill. You pay through internet, and the robot starts printing your bicycles 300 meters far away, and not anymore in China. So that means that the jobs of tomorrow, the skills of tomorrow, are not the jobs of yesterday and not the skills of yesterday. The issue is that governments that work together with educational institutions are very late in converting the existing curriculums. I have been spending 6 years in the National Education Board, so I know what I'm talking about in the Netherlands. Very late in converting that to a new strategy to adapt to the new world. And that's not only leading to high technological jobs, it's really leading to even low and medium paid jobs. We can make analysis about that, and I've been thinking about that for years. That's why we in our region invited Jeremy Rifkin, one of the big thinkers about this philosophy of Internet of Things, to work with me in the city of The Hague, in the whole metropolitan area, to design what we call the economy of the future, based on this development. And the big danger is that in educational institutions, including the very old institutes that are working in technology, lay behind, will not stimulate this process.
Mayor, do you think it's as more speed, so they're lagging the marketplace, or is it lack of alignment? So if you could get, can education institutions ever catch up with the marketplace in real time?
Never.
Never.
Never. You know, we have been working together with the so-called bakelite telephone for 100 years, where the life cycle of this machine is 2 years. Right. So and you need 4 years to get your diploma. This is 2 years. So whenever you enter the labor market with your new adapted knowledge, it's obsolete for the labor market. That will be the big challenge for us. I'm an engineer myself, so I have been learning how to do the math, to calculate if you press an A here, what is the big risk in statistics to become a B in the United States, and how can an engineer there discover that I meant an E and not a B, and I can change it in an E? Well, it's obsolete learning. It's not acceptable anymore. So we have to change our methodology to bring more the production systems into our learning systems. If we don't do that, we'll never catch up with the way we deliver young people into the industry.
So it's the integration, really, of the marketplace and the education systems.
Yeah, correct.
Mayor Alder, you feel free to talk about anything that you find most innovative in Geneva right now as it relates to workforce and job, but I was intrigued by how on the plenary just now you focused on children and the needs of children as it relates to how do the fate of children connect to workforce and labor markets?
Alors, je partage tout à fait les propos, mais aussi les inquiétudes du maire de Rotterdam. Et je crois que, comme maire, on est tous, comment dire, inquiets face à ces changements, ces bouleversements au niveau du travail, qui amènent tout de même beaucoup d'exclusion. C'est un monde du travail qui devient très concurrentiel. Je veux dire, le marché du travail est alimenté à travers la mondialisation avec une mise en concurrence des habitants locaux. Et s'agissant des jeunes, eh bien, effectivement, alors nous, pour la ville de Genève, nous ne sommes pas en charge des programmes de formation, mais nous subissons les conséquences d'un retard, comme ça a été souligné, avec aussi des jeunes qui décrochent, comme on dit, qui abandonnent la formation. Et là, c'est vraiment un réel problème parce que peut-être que contrairement à il y a 10, 15, 20 ans où on pouvait encore s'en sortir plus ou moins, aujourd'hui c'est plus possible. Donc notre attention va vers celles et ceux qui vont moins bien et je pense que c'est nécessaire. Alors comment nous faisons à Genève, c'est qu'on a on soutient des associations qui font quasiment du nurturing, je dirais presque, avec des jeunes, pour les accompagner, pour faire des démarches auprès des entreprises, pour qu'ils puissent avoir une seconde chance. Et c'est clair que ça a un coût aussi. Et je dirais qu'avec les politiques publiques qui sont souvent maintenant remises en cause aussi, avec une droite très dure, où il faut arrêter d'investir sur le social, où on nous coupe certains budgets, eh bien, je pense que si ça continue comme ça, c'est vrai que ça va être très difficile pour cette jeunesse-là qui n'y arrive pas, qui n'y arrivera pas si on ne lui donne pas des opportunités de rattraper. Et quand je dis que je parlais des enfants, c'est vrai que notre défi aujourd'hui, au niveau de l'intégration, déjà des tout petits, de les soutenir. Et moi, j'ai bien écouté le maire de Rotterdam où il disait le samedi, où je crois que vous ouvrez vos écoles, vous financez, je crois, 8 heures d'école supplémentaires pour celles et ceux qui n'y arrivent pas. Par semaine, c'est beaucoup. Et donc, voilà, je crois qu'on doit vraiment avoir cette attention pour celles et ceux qui n'y arrivent pas. Et peut-être aussi, encore juste un dernier mot, c'est qu'avec ces changements, il faudra bien réfléchir aussi comment notre sécurité sociale pourra être financée, parce que jusqu'à maintenant, en tout cas en Suisse, c'est le travail qui finance les rentes pour les retraités, c'est aussi toute la sécurité en cas d'invalidité, enfin bref. Et aujourd'hui, eh bien, ces caisses, elles sont en train de se vider. On a l'allongement de la population en termes de vie, c'est formidable, mais en même temps, comment on va financer ça? Alors j'ai entendu dire que maintenant, certains pensent qu'il fallait taxer la robotique, et je pense que peut-être c'est une voie. Et ensuite, moi, je suis militante du Parti des Verts. Nous avons subi un échec au niveau national. On voulait un revenu universel qui assure à tout le monde un seuil minimum au niveau financier pour lui donner cette sécurité et pas laisser les gens dans cette incertitude. Aujourd'hui, si on n'a pas de travail, on est à l'aide sociale. Les aides sociales, constamment, on fait peser aux personnes la responsabilité de leur malheur, alors qu'en fait, ils n'y peuvent rien. C'est notre société, c'est notre monde qui est impitoyable. Voilà.
It's very, very interesting points. When we come into the fuller discussion, I'd like to probe more on, so how do we pay for this? So if it's a new social contract, the social contract includes financing and where does it come from and how does it get shared? It's a very, very interesting point. Mayor Gonzalez, as you think about some of your own work, your city's work in the labor force and workforce development, one of the things I was intrigued by that you said in the full panel is your levers are really tone and convening. In fact, this was the first comment I've heard about money. So I wonder how you think about, as it relates to the labor force and workforce development and the skills gap and whatever it is, those disconnected young people. What are you doing? What do you think the future looks like in terms of being able to close that gap?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's a little hard to focus because I've never been in a room this beautiful. So if I gravitate to looking at the ceilings, you'll understand why. When I first came into office 2 years ago, I was made aware of the simple fact that 80% of the time that a child is awake is spent outside of a classroom. So what happens before they go to school and when they leave the classroom is our opportunity as a city to make sure that they have full access and participation in a community that for 400 years has been inclusive, has allowed for participation. I have a view that every child that graduates from high school should be a citizen of the world. Santa Fe is world-renowned for its arts and culture. We have the Los Alamos National Laboratories. The biggest challenge has been, though, is that we all operate in silos. The kids go to school, they do their work, the city government provides for safe neighborhoods and recreational services. The business sector goes on trying to be competitive. No one has been talking to one another. There's been no alignment. So we took on this focus of saying, rather than ask for new revenues from the public, let's figure out how to work smarter together. We created a mayor's cabinet on children, youth, and families, which really is meant to bring all the organizations that focus from prenatal to career together to set a series of indicators to make sure our kids are on the right track. And to be a citizen of the world doesn't only mean that you graduate, but that you're ready to go into the workforce. You have the workforce skills needed to be successful, or you're going to be able to go to college, whether it's a 2 or 4-year program. So we set goals like increasing birth rates, pre-K readiness, third grade reading levels, mentorship, and then putting high school kids on career pathways from the time they get into 9th and 10th grade, so they begin to think about what it is that they want. Equally important, you have to focus on the other side. You have to make sure that your economy stays healthy enough in that it's providing robust jobs. The biggest challenge in Santa Fe and for many cities in the secondary and tertiary markets is that there is this exodus into urban communities. So many people in Santa Fe want to go live in New York, and they want to go to Los Angeles, they want to go to Paris, or wherever it might be, to be able to enjoy and participate in a global economy. So making the city attractive for them to make a decision to stay or come back to is about providing jobs that are exciting and relevant to them. So investing in economies that build on the arts and culture and the science are some of the key areas that we're focused on. But our focus on closing the inequality gap, the education gap, is to first get everyone at the table, agree to some specific outcomes, build interoperable databases so that we really understand, are we making progress in the eyes of a child as opposed to just high-level data? We're always looking at what those big numbers are. And then allocating resources more strategically based on what a child's need is, as opposed to what some type of organization is telling you that they want to fulfill. And I think that most importantly, what we've had to do is create an expectation in our community that there is some patience that we have to exhibit. This is a long-term view, but we have to act very impatiently. We have to move resources very quickly, consistently, always with the promise of being held accountable by measuring data that tracks to the child and what the child and the family's need is, as opposed to the systems that are saying that they want to deliver, X, Y, Z in closing a gap. So it's a fundamental shift by saying we're taking resources away from organizations, although they're still going to be required to deliver it. But the only way money is going to get there is if they can prove and show that there's a measurable, quantifiable way that the child is actually growing and learning and mapping towards that ultimate goal of graduating as a citizen of the world, which in our mind is they're ready to go to college or they're ready to go into workforce, access those jobs with the social and upward mobility that are critical.
So it's fascinating. What I hear in that approach is, among other things, the mayor is the chief goal-setting officer for his or her community, that you set the goals for in partnership with your community. It's fascinating. Gabriela.
And I have to say that one line that gathers the three comments of the mayors is that they are prioritizing those that are being left behind. It's not about how much more financing, because we're in a context of low growth and low revenues, but how do you manage really to bring those that are lagging behind? And this is pretty much in line with the work that the OECD has been doing in the Inclusive Growth Initiative and the inequality, because we concluded, and this is almost like all this academic work saying the bottom 40%, the bottom 40%. In my country is the bottom 60, is no longer the bottom. So how you just redefine the whole equation, because the fact is that we're leaving behind so many people. And that confirms that the cities have a real role to play, because it's where you mentioned the gaps, where we really need to focus. And let me just share, before I give the floor to Sylvain Guiguer to be the discussant, and also to Joe Parilla or Parilla? Parilla. It's very interesting because the OECD is also the house of the PISA assessment of students' outcomes. And one of the most interesting interventions that is pretty much in line with what you're saying is that the systems that succeed in equality and quality dedicate the best teachers to the most marginalized schools. So I think this is the kind of message we're hearing from you. You have the floor, Sylvain.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you so much to the three speakers. I mean, you've made a very real demonstration of why implementation matters, and this is what we are focusing increasingly at the OECD, because the way you implement programs can make a tremendous difference on the ground in terms of outcomes. It's not easy to work on education and skills at the local level because, as we said, this is often a very centralized policy areas. So what you can do is, as the Mayor of Santa Fe said earlier this afternoon, set the tone, convene, and what was the third thing that you said? Drive collaboration, exactly, and this is key. And, but then there's a whole range of things that you can do. I mean, you talked about all three places about the importance of childhood education, and we at the OECD, our work has shown that this is fundamental to drive employment outcomes. I mean, 1 year of employment of preschool education increase your points by 5% in the PISA score. So this is enough to bring you on top of the above the average. We talked about internship. It is so important to connect people to the young people to the labor market, and adapting skills to the new technology and the need to bring together workforce development and economic development. And this is one of the real issues to address at the local level. Now, there's one other thing that we need to talk about if we want to increase productivity and inclusion at the same time. And at the OECD, we are trying to find very practical ways on how we can stimulate productivity in a more inclusive environment. And it is, how do we stimulate our companies to better use the talent that they have, their main assets, so that they can increase their productivity, find new, innovate further, think about new products, new strategies. How do we better use the talent to make our companies more resilient and more productive? And this is a way to increase the quality of work. And how do we do that? There is no single policy to do this. It is all about cooperation, because universities can do it if they do applied research with SMEs. Training institutions, if they can do the same and work with on the workforce planning and the human resource development of SMEs. It can work also if you have the Chamber of Commerce and the economic development agencies, which will think beyond infrastructure and economic development and FDI, and they will think in terms of skills. So it's all about cooperation and coordination and leveraging the right policy. And is there something that you are doing to try to bring the SMEs to the next level up and create better quality jobs in more productive companies?
Can we ask Joe to follow up, and then we will give the floor to Brian and the majors.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the comments, and congratulations on launching the action plan. I'm a fellow at the Brookings Institution. We're a supportive institution, I think is what we call it, to the OECD in this work. Yeah, a partner. There you go. So we're really thrilled to be here and to be participating in this. And I think what I take away from this is that having set a set of goals, as you mentioned, through the action plan, that we are now moving towards implementation. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution for cities. And I think coming from a US context, where the skills and education systems are actually pretty decentralized at the state level, but also at the local level. We find that these local coalitions of business leaders, philanthropy, unions, and elected officials that end up setting the table are where this problem are ultimately going to be solved. And so I just want to reflect on a couple of things that we've observed in the US. The first is that communicating to the business community the importance of making investments in training is something that we haven't done a great job of doing. It's where the majority of training occurs, is within companies, and I think we have to remember that. So I think there's some interesting work that's coming out of the US that is trying to convince firms to treat their workers and their talent like they do the rest of their supply chain. They call this the talent supply chain, and that it is an underappreciated asset in the competitiveness of companies. I think, at least in the US, this is such an important argument, and it gets to Sylvain's point, and it gets to your point about bringing in employers early in this process. The second point I'll just make is around the future of work, and I think I'm in complete agreement with what you said, in that there's a lot of uncertainty as to the future skills that are going to be needed. And the feedback loops between companies, who are ultimately the ones that have to make a decision about what skills they want, and the training institutions, is far too slow. So I think there's emerging evidence that's coming that's saying that having some faculties with technology is one important thing that we can focus on, and there's a wage premium for people with STEM skills all across the education spectrum, from your PhD engineers to your factory line workers. So endowing more workers with those skills, I think, is important. But it's also teaching people to learn how to learn. I think there are some cognitive skills, as you said, Gabriela, and a flexibility and a nimbleness that we don't know a lot about how to teach, but our K through 12 or pre-K through 12 education system is going to have to figure that out, because we don't know what the next round of technologies is going to force our skilling institutions to do. But if we can prepare people to be adaptable, we'll have a better shot of allowing them to earn good wages and kind of rebuild the middle class and some of the challenges that you mentioned.
So really good stuff. To get the mayors to react to this, one of the theme I hear on this is that the marketplace is changing very quickly. Digital technology advancements, skill requirements changing. The companies are going as fast and changing as fast as they can. The training systems, the governments, the civil society organizations are slower. So what is the new, so you have these collaborative decision-making processes, but governments have their mandates and the law that they have to follow, where theoretically companies can be more nimble. What do you think what's important in terms of those new decision-making models, the collaborative models that close the loop that Joe talked about, and bring in the SMEs as well? So you can work with the big companies because you know who they are, but how do you work with the smaller employers? And so, Mayor.
Working with smaller companies is really difficult because they are not always involved in innovation, and it's there where the growth is. Without innovation, no growth. Right. Without innovation, no new products. So we have, as cities, to stimulate these small companies jointly in a branch to work together on innovation. So that's the only thing to do that. If you have an SMI that makes $50,000 a year, there's no capacity to invest in innovation. But if you have 10 of them working in the same branch, you can stimulate that. Yeah. And then the message from my side to the banks is, please help them. And if they don't want to give some small loans for these companies, then we may also work together with pension funds, and that's public money, to try to engage them in the process of innovation. The other side is also that Mother Nature, we are all equal human beings, but we don't have equal talents. So we have a group of citizens that we cannot educate. Nobody talks about them. It's about 15% of all societies. It's in India the same as in Paris, in New York. 15% of our societies, people that we cannot send to school, we cannot educate them. The only thing to do for them to find appropriate jobs, decent jobs, that's what I have been talking about with the employers in my city. I invited one group of 150 companies for dinner, asking them, please go job gardening, create jobs for these young people. Let me give you one example. Once my father was in the hospital, and then I was there. I was called from the city council, went to there, and there was a nurse bringing him from the place where he was in the hospital to, in the same hospital, to another corner for the lab to do some research on his blood. The nurse brought him there. She was waiting 45 minutes. Then the examination came, and then she brings him back to the other corner. It took about 3 hours. 3 hours, a nurse out of production system. A work that can be done by someone who has no skills at all. So why do we charge such a nurse with such a complicated and easy job? And we know from research that we have a segment of our workforce that can be involved in this. Why do the hospitals in the Netherlands not invite these people to work in hospitals? Because they have to pay them the same salaries as nurses, due to the collective bargaining agreement between employers and the unions. We have to terminate that and find new social solutions within that system. The other example I would like to give you is when I was sick, I was in the government, in the national government. And I was discussing with the unions and the employers, and they independently from the government have the authority to negotiate a collective agreement every year. That's their own authority given by law. So I was suggesting, because the issue of training people is not only training at school, but it's also training on the job. Can we introduce a system of lifetime learning on the job, so that you don't get from January the 1st the additional every year €100 on your income, but you get that only if you had spent last year at least a week learning in the formal training institutions. So you get an increment of your salary depending on the numbers of days that you're spending in learning, to stimulate the workforce to continue learning every year. And my proposal was the government should pay a third of it through taxes, tax deduction system, the employers a third, and the worker a third. So you have a system, maybe an idea for the OECD to consider. There was no support for the idea.
From whom? No support?
Not from the unions, not from the employers' organizations. Well, sometimes such a proposal can be not timely. So I think it was not the appropriate time to come up with such a proposal. But still there, if you want really to continue train your workforce, you have to find something that stimulates people to continue learning every time, and then you give some stimulus in the money, in the salaries they get every year, if they succeed in doing that. So there are practical things to do with people that we cannot educate, and we have instruments, possible instruments, if these partners, they are partners and they have the power, if they would like to act in this direction.
You know, it's really interesting. It doesn't take a lot of money in that case to change how a great deal of money is spent. Yeah.
I have been doing the math for about €500 a year.
Yeah.
You may send an employee to the formal educational institution, and if you divide that by 3, it's the cost of €130, €140 per partner. That is almost nothing.
And then we got to get that pension money better invested.
I would just add a couple of quick points for things that we've done in Santa Fe, but just add that unless you have accessible housing, no matter how well you close the income inequality gap, you're always going to struggle with the workforce, and that's our challenge in Santa Fe is a workforce being able to access housing. I think Joe's point about businesses needing to really recognize by putting more money into training that they'll get quicker results is important, because the old institutions, the universities and the the state which governs the universities, everyone's only gets reimbursed if kids are on a 2-year track or a 4-year track. And many of our skill sets that are needed don't require 2 or 4 years. They require certification programs in learning how to use a 3D machine or how to code. And that makes it very expensive for people having to pay for certificate programs or the 2-year schools having to allocate resources that don't lead to a degree. So if we can build those relationships with businesses that will invest in training programs that don't require 2 or 4 years, that works. The final point that I would say that we found out in Santa Fe is small businesses are important to talk about. What we've learned, though, by investing in entrepreneurship, we're seeing faster job growth. And so Santa Fe's ranked #1 in New Mexico, number 13th nationwide for delivering jobs that are associated in entrepreneurship. So what we've been doing is using local government funds, our funds, to invest in entrepreneurs who are showing us that they have business ideas with the proper talent around them that can not only serve the marketplace in Santa Fe, but scale up to provide services and programs that are applicable on a global scale. And we've seen a large amount of job growth and opportunity that's occurred outside of just the regular small business investments and access to capital.
That's great. Mayor Alder, if you'd like to respond to our discussants, then we'll open it up to the audience. So if you have a question, be thinking of it, and it needs to be a brief question, not a speech. We'll have a microphone, and then we'll go another 10 or 12 minutes. Please, Mayor.
Alors, en Suisse, on a un système aussi de formation qui est très intéressant. C'est la formation duale, où les jeunes dès 15 ans peuvent se former en entreprise et ils ont des cours en parallèle. Maintenant, on voit que les entreprises, parce que former un apprenti, ça prend du temps, les entreprises ne veulent pas perdre du temps, donc il faut les encourager à investir sur justement cette jeunesse. Donc la ville de Genève, par exemple, a débloqué un fonds assez important pour encourager les entreprises à former des jeunes. Donc lorsqu'une entreprise forme un jeune, elle reçoit de la part de la collectivité un montant qui l'aide justement ou la dédommage de l'effort qu'elle fait pour former cette jeunesse. Après, c'est vrai qu'on est dans une époque où effectivement il va falloir se former tout au long de sa vie. Maintenant, on voit aussi, en Suisse, on a peut-être eu moins jusqu'à maintenant des grandes révoltes, parce qu'on a quand même une certaine mixité sociale. Mais si je prends l'exemple de ce que j'ai pu voir dans certains quartiers pas loin d'ici, hein, où il y a des quartiers où des jeunes sont très bien formés, mais personne ne les engage, parce qu'il y a le nom qui ne va pas. On est une société quand même extrêmement raciste, selon son nom de famille. On est déjà stigmatisé lorsqu'on envoie son curriculum. Donc il y a aussi des politiques d'intégration qui essayent de faire qui masquent les noms pour que on puisse avoir cette égalité d'accès à un emploi et qu'on ne soit pas recalé en fonction de justement son nom de famille ou de ses convictions. Et là, je pense qu'on a aussi beaucoup de travail à faire parce que cet accès doit être justement égalitaire. L'accès à un emploi dans l'administration, il doit être permis pour toutes et pour tous. Mais c'est un problème aujourd'hui.
It's a great point. Your final point about inclusiveness and openness for all jobs, and I would be remiss if I didn't. My 28-year-old daughter would be very upset if I didn't say and include gender in that need for anonymity. If you look at resumes and hiring, it's the male name that gets pulled out more often as well. So this is generally good point all around. Let's go to the audience and see if we have 7 minutes. Is that what we have? If someone has a question for one of the mayors, we'd be happy to take it. We have a microphone right back here. Okay. Yeah, let's see if we have, that's a good idea. So if we have more than one question, raise your hand and we'll do 2 or 3 and then we'll be able to group it.
This is a question for Mayor Gonzalez. If he would be willing to tell us how he funds the homework diner, if there are any security questions around establishing the diner, and whether it's being replicated in other cities. Thank you.
So let's say, that's so specific. Take that one, Mayor.
The security, I didn't understand the security question.
Were there any security issues in establishing the diner? Maybe there weren't any if the question never came up in creating it.
Yeah. None from a security standpoint, but the diner is funded by a collaboration of 15 agencies inside the city, from the food depot to the schools to the city in the schools. So it was a collaborative effort. No new money needed to be generated. We just prioritized and allocated from existing resources.
It's a theme you hear, reallocation, if you can get agreement among different parties to do the reallocation. Is there a question back here? And raise your hand if you also have a question. We'll get a microphone to you as well.
Oui. Oui, une question. Est-ce que par rapport à la dimension entreprise et l'accessibilité des entreprises à la formation, mais je pense aussi aux collectivités territoriales, enfin ça c'est plus le côté français, mais aux villes et aux territoires, je dirais, qui sont officiels et non officiels, puisqu'il y a des groupes projets quand même de plus en plus associatifs, d'économie solidaire, enfin il faut penser au monde participatif. Est-ce que la question de l'évaluation, de l'entretien d'évaluation, ne pourrait pas être un élément intéressant dans lequel on pourrait intégrer cette notion d'apprentissage, enfin, je suis au comité mondial pour les apprentissages tout au long de la vie, d'apprentissage tout au long de la vie qui serait redessiné, en tout cas quelque part, dans des questions d'évaluation du salarié, tout comme des gens qui travaillent dans les villes ou dans les territoires ou dans le monde associatif. Souvent, cette démarche d'évaluation, elle ne relève que du domaine professionnel. D'ailleurs, quand on fait un CV, ou quand on demande aux gens quelle est votre activité, c'est professionnel. Or, c'est des activités, c'est-à-dire mon activité citoyenne, mon activité dans ma vie familiale, mon activité dans l'école, mon activité personnelle, voilà. Donc, la feuille d'évaluation, ça me semble être quelque chose qui pourrait tout à fait être important. Moi, j'ai eu l'exemple d'une collectivité locale qui, en termes de mobilité, par exemple,
really brief example. Okay, thank you. So the two pieces of that question. One is I think it goes back to this point about the different industries creating different value now within employment. You know, what's the entry-level job and what's required there in terms of formal training and life skills, and how do you value that? And the other that I'd love to hear your reaction to, and I haven't yet read your new report today, but what is the role of cities in more regional economic development and even getting into rural communities? Do you see responsibility in that regard? And is economic development always seemed to be a big regional or a state issue or a provincial issue? Is it now more of a super urban issue in that regard? Please.
Yeah, well, when it comes to the type of education, formal or informal education, in my opinion, there is no place in that debate for the local politics, neither for the national politics. It's an issue between the employers and the employees. It's there where it's dictated what kind of skills are needed for today and what kind of skills are needed for tomorrow. And then it's the educational institutions that need to adapt to that. Let me give you an example. When I was learning how to design ships in 1984, there was not a professor in our institute who was able to do that. The only one who could do that was that the university hired someone from Philips Eindhoven to come to The Hague to teach us how to design ships. That is, avant la lettre, a kind of a collaboration between the formal institution and the industry, just because the industry was interested in creating new skills and creating new professionals to work in the labs in Eindhoven to design ships. And it's, I think, the government, I love government, but not a big government, nor a small government. I would like to have a strong government that's exactly doing what is needed, not more. And so I know my place. If there is not a role for government, please kick out the government out of that process.
Yeah.
But you was asking something about the economic infrastructure. Let me give you one example in Rotterdam, and if you go to the website of the city, the first thing you will see is a bridge. A wonderful bridge that designed in the 90s. Thanks to that bridge, a government decision, the other side of the water, we created a 4 billion euros of economy. And it was rubbish terrain, and nowadays the last square meters are leased to the biggest telecom provider in the Netherlands to build his quarter over there. So the government decisions can be really decisive when it comes to urban planning, zoning, and infrastructure, public transport. Things like that are really crucial. So that's exactly that what's needed to collaborate together with the public sector to create new ideas.
Yeah, and way beyond the city limits in many cases.
And I think we are one of the few regions in the world that I asked the OECD to come to the region to make a very specific study of our shortcomings. What do we do good? What are our mistakes? And then they come up with a very specific report. And that report led last week, a couple of months, to a decision within the whole agglomeration, 23 mayors, to decide about an investment program of 15 billion euros for the years ahead. So that's the collaboration you need to take necessary steps to shape the future economy.
And Mayor Gonzalez, were you going to respond to that, Mayor Elder?
Oui, vous parliez du fait, disons, la question c'était comment on peut encourager en tant que collectivité publique les entreprises à investir. Ce que j'aimerais dire aujourd'hui, il y a quand même une réalité qui nous dépasse parfois, c'est la concurrence. Je veux dire, les entreprises, elles sont plus forcément attachées à une ville, à un territoire, à un pays. Il y a évidemment la question de l'optimalisation fiscale. Les entreprises veulent faire quand même de plus en plus de profit, en tout cas leurs managers et leurs conseils d'administration. Au niveau suisse, actuellement, on discute sur un taux d'imposition qui permettrait aussi d'atténuer la concurrence qu'on a déjà au sein de notre propre pays, entre les différents cantons. Mais la situation, elle devrait déjà se discuter au niveau, à l'échelle déjà du continent, de l'Europe, pour que les uns et les autres contribuent, enfin, que les entreprises payent la même chose selon qu'ils soient aux Pays-Bas, en Suisse, ou enfin nous on n'est pas encore dans l'Europe, mais je pense que déjà là c'est quelque chose d'important. Et puis surtout, il faut que j'ai l'impression que les entreprises, souvent, elles profitent aussi beaucoup des systèmes, mais que les recettes nous échappent, nous, pour après réinvestir. Donc c'est un grave problème.
Probably not a great note to end on, but we're probably going to end on that one. What I heard, and then Gabriela will close it, is collaborative decision making, long-term thinking, people-centered. Those things are what's going to be both good economic policy as well as social service policy, and I do think this last point about the relationships from cities out, not just cities in, as cities become more and more influential, the requirement on economic development and policy beyond city limits is probably going to be even more important. Maybe it's a human bridge, Mayor, that gets built as well. Gabriela.
I'm not going to even try to summarize, because that's what Mario Pezzini is doing right there, and we need to move to the plenary. I just want to say that this conversation has just started. We really would like to have like 3 hours with you to listen to every single very innovative way of addressing the issues that you have shared with us. I just need to say that for the OECD, we have this nexus work that Silvan mentioned, which is just to make sure that we invest in people, in regions and firms to enable them, and mostly the bottom 40, as I said, or 60 or whatever, to fulfill their full potential. That's the whole point. And I just want to leave you, and maybe we can share it afterwards, global competencies. You mentioned gender, you mentioned migration, you mentioned jobs. We really need to move the education system from the cognitive and social-emotional to also teaching values, teaching understanding, and teaching tolerance. So that's something that I will just put at the table that we also do at the OECD. And we go to the plenary, please, because we are running a little bit late. But thank you, you did a great job. Thank you.